welcome to this episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. Today is the 18th of March, 2020, and the nation and the world is still kind of self-quarantining in the hope of reducing the spread of the coronavirus so that our various health systems can accommodate the influx of critically ill patients that we anticipate. And in the meantime, the world goes on. There's still things that are happening today. Utah was affected by a magnitude 5.7 earthquake that was so significant that the Angel Moroni statue at the spear of the Salt Lake Temple actually dropped the trumpet. And there are a lot of people that are sharing messages about their believing Mormon families, spreading information in news about these things, indicating that it is a form of the sign of the times. And so since the Mormon Church uses that end times rhetoric in a lot of what they do, I think it's understandable that people on the believing side of things feel somewhat justified in that the things that they believe are a sign of the times are coming to pass, and there are other people who have rejected that end times rhetoric who take a different perspective on it. I don't have anything formally prepared today, but I thought it would be fun to just open up phone lines and see what was on people's minds. So if you want to give voice to your feelings at this particular moment in time and share them and any of the reflections that you have, then I encourage you to give us a call. The phone number is 210-422-2222. And let's talk about it. As usual, I have Yu-Gi-Oh, who's decided he's going to be good today, and he's already gone into the naughty realm. So he's got his treat, and he's going to hide it somewhere in my house that I'll find later. In the meantime, there was a fun thing that was shared with me about, let's see if I can find it here. Chrome tab. Yeah, let's see what we got here. Is this the right one? Yeah. So there's a young millennial who is a Mormon defender and public figure. He's really a comedian and a spokesperson who just happens to occupy the space of defending the church. His name is Kwaku L. And he posted something on Facebook that probably encapsulates the way a lot of faithful people are looking at this issue. And he provided a scriptural quote, which is taken from the Doctrine and Covenants, section 45, 26 through 35. And it talks about some end time prophecies that Joseph Smith, God through Joseph Smith was revealing. And you can read it here. I wonder if they may even have it like on the church's website, read by somebody with the voice of Charlton Heston or something like that. But you can see it's like, and in that day shall be heard wars and rumors of wars. It's not really that effective. I may be able to actually do something here to increase the effectiveness of this. This is something that the church does frequently. When you listen to General Conference, you're not just listening to some old guys talk. You're listening to a pretty slick product that includes some vocal manipulation. So you're giving Testing, testing, test 1, 2. Oh, okay, yeah, so the audio disappeared again. All right, hold on. I'm working it. Just give me a sec. Testing. All right, we got that working. Voice changer. Hello, hello. No. Okay, well, I'll have to give up on it. All right, let's go back to testing, testing. Okay, hold on. Hold a second. It might be working now. Okay. So somebody says it's working. All right, so let's see. I got it. I've been trying to get this set up so that in the future I can use it for certain things. But what I have to do is I have to get a something that is really like the voice of God. Now, hold on. Hello. Okay, I can't even hear my own voice on this. Let me see if I can change output devices. Oh yeah, that's the reason why. All right, we'll just. There we go. Okay. Testing. Yes. Okay. The voice of God. Okay, this works. All right, but it's a little not happy with it. Got to change it. Okay, let's see here.
Yes. That's. Hello? Okay. One of these.
One of these. No, not.
One of these voices that's gonna be really good for reading end time revelations. Not this one.
Ruby Rod. Okay, hold on.
Okay. Sometime here. I'm not a fan of any of this. All right. We're just going to have to stay with this. Yes. Okay. All right, we'll do this one. All right, here we go. We're going to read it now so that you can really get the impact. And in that day shall be heard wars, and rumors of wars, and the whole earth shall be in commotion, and men's hearts shall fail them, and they shall say that Christ delayeth his coming until the end of the earth, and the love of men shall wax cold, and iniquity shall abound. And when the times of the Gentiles is come, a light shall break forth among them that sit in darkness. And it shall be the fullness of my gospel, but they receive it not. For they perceive not the light, and they turn their heads from me because of the precepts of men. And in that generation shall the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be men standing in that generation that shall not pass until they shall see an overflowing scourge, for a desolating sickness shall cover the land. But my disciples shall stand in holy places and shall not be moved. But among the wicked, men shall lift up their voices and curse God and die. And there shall be earthquakes also in diverse places, and many desolations, yet men will harden their hearts against me. They will take up the sword, one with another, and they will kill one with another. And now when I, the Lord, have spoken these words unto my disciples, they were troubled. And I said unto them, Be not troubled, for when all these things shall come to pass, ye may know that the promises which have been made unto you shall be fulfilled. And that's how it's done. So, I gotta undo this now because it's ridiculous. This is ridiculous. All right, boop. Okay, I think I need to actually. Testing, testing, 1, 2. Okay, now we're back to normal. All right. That was ridiculous, I agree. But it's just to make the point that, people who are defending the church, who take a faithful perspective for the church, look to Scripture to try to explain the events of the world. And so it's not really a surprising thing that they're going to find significance in things like a worldwide pandemic and earthquakes. It's just whenever you hear those things, you have to step back and say, is it actually a sign of the times, or is it coincidence? And the brilliant thing about the way that prophets, or people claiming to be prophets, use revelation is that in their revelation, they include the fact that people will doubt that the things come to pass. And you saw that there. And that doubt is almost proof that it is real. So, you could go back and look at any, revelations-based end times cult or group that has ever existed, and the leader will include the idea that people are going to doubt their prophecies, and so when people do doubt their prophecies, that itself was a prophecy. Does that prove that it's real? It's interesting because when the news first came out about the earthquake, people were like, "Wow, it does sound like end times," and you just have to realize that because these groups that claim divine sanction and prophecy, and that they are the fulfillment of prophecy, they're able to latch on to whatever details they want to latch on to in order to reframe what their prophecy is, to have it support their organization and the teachings and the ideas of the organization. But when you see things that could be reframed in a different way, they're going to ignore that. So, if we were to, for example, if some prophet was to have said, and the great symbol of the wicked secular world was going to be struck down, if that was like somewhere in prophecy, and then there was an earthquake and the torch of the Statue of Liberty broke off the arm and fell, then the religious people would be like, look, it's the sign, because the torch is the symbol that they were talking about, and it fell, and it'd be like, it's proof that God is chastising the secular American world. Well, I think Christians outside of Mormonism would, even if they held on to this end time perspective, they would say that the trumpet of the Mormon symbol of Moroni being struck down from the statue is a sign of God's displeasure with the Mormon people, the Mormon prophet, the Mormonism. And from their perspective, that makes perfect, consistent, coherent sense. And the idea that there's an earthquake in Utah at a time where there's a worldwide calamity also makes sense from their perspective, because that would be God chastising the religious authorities in Utah for, taking God's name and teachings in vain. So it just depends on what perspective you want to take. It's kind of like interpreting poetry or interpreting abstract art. You can take whatever details that you need and reframe them to support your own perspective, and it will seem legitimate from your believing perspective. And so the Mormons can do it from within their own belief structure, and the wider Christian world can do it from within their own belief structure. And the dangerous thing is, with either of those perspectives, there's this whole notion that these end time events and calamities are leading towards something. And when that something is some sort of great battle between good and evil, God's people and the rest of the world, then it creates a very divisive, very antagonistic way of looking at the wider world. And it may lead you to make decisions as a country, as a people, that you wouldn't otherwise make, or maybe it may lead you to act out of fear in a way that you would not already, otherwise act. And, we right now are living in a time where, because of social media, because of news networks, we all have a very keen awareness and sense of urgency about the things that are happening around us, because we're aware of them. And we think that it bears directly on these religious frameworks that we've been told are prophecies about the future and the end days. But if you place yourself in a different frame of time. Place yourself in the middle of World War II or World War I in some of the cities that were completely decimated by the wars and the rumors of wars and the actualities of wars. Place yourself in the middle of the Spanish pandemic of 1918, where people all around were getting sick and dying seemingly out of nowhere, or any of the other world calamities. Place yourself in the middle of the areas that are most affected by them. And you could see how anybody who's drawing on these scriptural stories now to try to put them out as a warning of the times could have done it at that time as well, and it would have had just as much powerful effect. And yet the world went on, and those end times did not occur. As a world, we're wrestling with this particular pandemic. The world has seen other pandemics before, but it's never seen other pandemics while we had the power of social media and the ability to have the type of instantaneous communication that happens now, so that we can feel every tragedy much more closer to ourselves than we ever could have before. And that really just changes the way that you experience these sorts of things. So if you want to share your own perspective on how you're dealing with these issues, or maybe the type of communication that you've been receiving from your family, then please call 210-422-2222. We'd love to hear from you. The comments, let's take a look at some of these comments and see what we have here. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff about audio. So let's see here. Kyle says, is it the prophesied wickedest city, Salt Lake City, is going to be destroyed today? That comment was probably too soon. It was just a joke. I don't mean to cause any harm or distress with the joke, but it's all we can do with either. It's just this world of social media that we live in, where we're just so worried about offending people, is sometimes a little bit ridiculous. Laughter and humor are powerful coping mechanisms, and sometimes in the middle of really scary things or really frightening things, laughter is just a way to both acknowledge and diffuse the power that some of these scary things can have over us. So I don't intend to be shaming people if they make jokes about things that are going on. Jokes themselves can bring awareness to things, even if it's in a contrary sort of way. For people trying to put the earthquake of this morning into perspective, there was a bit of data circulating online by some of the people trying to push back against the narrative that this is some sort of unprecedented fulfillment of prophecy. That if you go back and look at the actual earthquake data that has been recorded by the institutes that monitor seismic activity, then you can see that seismic activity is always happening in certain parts of the world, and this includes in Utah, and that there have been quakes that most people just don't perceive, but are recorded by the sensitive instruments but that these academic institutions use. And let's see, it looks like there's a bit of data that, let's see here. Okay, I think I can share this one. Let's stop that screen and we will share the screen. Take a look at this one is called Today's Earthquakes in Utah. Okay, and let's see if I can increase the size of this. Not that. Let's increase the size of this. Keep that at 100%. All right, so Utah has had 38 earthquakes in the past 24 hours, 41 earthquakes in the past 7 days, 69 earthquakes in the past 30 days, and 670 earthquakes in the past 365 days. Today we did have the largest earthquake that they've seen in the last year. And you can see the places that are affected by it. If you want to see this data for yourself, you can go to earthquake track and enter in Utah as the location, and it'll give you that information. You can see that there have been other earthquakes of even higher magnitude in other parts of the world, in diverse parts of the world. And I'd be interested to see what are the biggest quakes that, let's see, big quakes near Utah. And then you can do Quark. Well, it's just letting you know that you can go and look at some of the data that's out there so that you can kind of put it in a perspective and a frame that takes a lot more data points into consideration. Okay, so again, you can join the conversation at 210-422-2222. Let's see here. What other information do we have? Well, let's see if we can find a picture of the Moroni statue earthquake, because there's been some interesting images about that. All right. Okay, so the Deseret News itself is, let's go to a different tab. All right, so earthquake causes Angel Moroni on Salt Lake Temple to lose his trumpet. And we can see Moroni there holding seemingly nothing. And I think somebody pointed out that the trumpet itself, you can see the statue up there. He's not really holding anything, and I think the trumpet itself is now on one of the parapets around the spire that Moroni is on. Let's see here. Moroni earthquake. Let's see what other stuff we have here. So, other damage around the Utah area. This is an elementary school. I think a lot of people were posting on Facebook that they were waking up to the earthquake. So it affected a lot of people in terms of jolting them from normal life. So, you know, when we live in our comfortable environment that don't seem to be really affected by these things, then bricks on the wall and everything falling seems remarkable. Let's see here if we can find. Let's see, this is the Philippines, who have experienced significant earthquakes. You know, if you look for the scale of earthquake type damage that has happened over the years in other parts of the world, you can see that there's far greater damage happening at times past in other parts of the world. And it's always interesting to hear people say, well, this is the fulfillment of prophecy and it's God's anger towards the world, or his wrath in preparation for the return of Christ. And, you know, people always wanting to bear that message down or calm that message down. They're, no. Christ's return is not going to be that calamitous. And yet, if you look in the Book of Mormon, in 3rd Nephi, chapters 8 and 9, when Christ came to the New World, it was accompanied by all sorts of stories of cities being pulled under the earth or flooded or, totally decimated by fire, all as a preamble to Christ returning. And then when Christ actually showed up, he informed the people there that the reason for that destruction was to, first of all, punish the wicked people who were destroyed, which included men, women, and children, but also to be a warning to those that survived that they needed to get in line and believe, or else they would suffer a similar fate. So a while ago, let's see here, there's a Mormon Easter story. So since that takes place around the story of Christ's resurrection, in the Bible we see the story of, Christ forgiving everybody, being loving, even forgiving the people that are killing him. And it's a compassionate tale of forgiveness. And that's why so many people have taken the story of Christ from the New Testament to heart. But then when you look at the Book of Mormon, it's a very, very different story. Okay, I think we may have our first call. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff. Give me just a second to set up the audio. Let's go there. Boop. Hi, what's on your mind?
Hi, this is Allison. Just calling in. I live in Utah County.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can tell by my accent, I'm originally from the South. And your show today has just come at the perfect time. I am not a Mormon, never have been a Mormon. And I would classify myself as a biblical Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are moving in. We knew exactly what we were getting into.
Can you really know what you're getting into moving into Utah?
I did. Well, I'm a religious studies sociologist. I've studied Mormonism for 20 years. Yeah.
I concede the point.
Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of your work. I think you do a lot of. I really respect all of your research and everything, Jonathan.
Thanks.
Anyway, so we don't have any food storage. We're getting ready to move into a different house. So before this earthquake came, it's freaky, man. And so I've never seen anything like it. And I think I saw a statistic last night that overbuying was 291%, compared to other states. And
panic
I'm
buying.
sorry, I've got my husband called.
Oh, that's okay.
Right. And then I woke up today. This is all. There's a point to all this. And so when we woke up today, we didn't feel it. Everybody else around us did. And I told my husband a few minutes ago on the phone. I said, "Are we wrong? Like, is the church true?" And I thought I would never say that, right? I'm the one that counsels people that leave, because I've had people contacting me saying, "I think the church is true, Allison. I need to talk to you." And I'm like, "Oh, dear God, no." And then the earthquake today, and it's just, my husband said, "You need to calm down and stay off of the internet and social media." So anyway, I will let you talk. I just wanted to call and say thank you for your show, and thank you for this topic today, because even as someone that's not Mormon, that is a biblical Christian, you are helping to put things in perspective and at least calm my heart. So I will get off there. And
well, before you leave,
another. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's always good that when you hear people like are calling you like, maybe the church is true. It's just like, well, hold on a second, which church? Because all these different churches have end time stories. And so people coming out of Mormonism, they only know their particular end time story. But you can, like right now, if you go to jw.org, the top headline that they have is the 4 horsemen of Revelation. And it talks all about their particular end time prophecies. And their rhetoric in terms of talking about the Great Tribulation and the apocalypse is much more the central focus of how they kind of use fear to bind their followers to them. And so you can imagine that there's probably in Utah, all the Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe some of them that have faded away, are asking themselves the same question: Is the governing body true? Is Jehovah's Witnesses true? And these things are not, they're not proof of anything other than that these sorts of things happen all of the time, and we use mythological or religious frameworks to try to bring meaning and explanation to them, and just kind of being aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and for some it brings them comfort, but it's I guess my husband and I are probably more of like pre-tribbers, so we believe that we believe that we don't have to go through all that, right? It's convenient for us.
Yeah.
And I'm actually pretty liberal when it comes to that. But anyway, I'll get off here. I just wanted to thank you so much. And we need another evil apostate appearance soon.
Yeah, it's always hard to bring him out. I don't know if the
I
time is
bet.
right. We'll
Yeah,
see.
well, it's a lot of, it's dangerous for him. It's dangerous
Yeah.
for him. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you and have a good day.
All right, you too. Thanks for the call.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation, the phone number is 210-422-2222. Tell us how you are taking the news, how you're dealing with being quarantined at home, how you're dealing with family members and loved ones that may be using some of the frankly scary events of the modern era and using that as some sort of proof that you need to then adopt and conform to a particular religious ideology. Let's see here. I remember in my own faith journey, when I first started studying the history of the church and the various things that are not controversial and are accepted facts both by believers and non-believers about some of the activities of Joseph Smith, those, because they've used this boogeyman of Satan the great deceiver and the idea that at the last days even the very chosen and elect will be deceived, it's very understandable and very normal for you to have those periods as you were studying your way out of the believing mindset of the church to lay awake at night and be afraid. What if I am being deceived? And you could imagine if you were a Jehovah's Witness and you were going through the same process, because they have very similar parallel manipulative points that they use. The idea that Satan controls the adversaries of the church, and that those people who fall away from the church are being deceived by the adversary. So for them, if they lay in bed awake at night afraid that, what if the Jehovah's Witness church is true, then one of the things that is helpful for them is to recite in their mind, well, wait a second, if the Jehovah's Witness thing is true, then people really should let their children die rather than receive a blood transfusion. That there is no real worth to doctors or other professions that require higher levels of education, because those things are not going to be needed in the great paradise that will follow the tribulation. And so all the benefit that we have from those technologies is pointless, or is actually against the intentions of Jehovah. If the church is really true from the Jehovah's Witness perspective, then it's totally fine and normal that everybody who is in the world that didn't follow the church is going to be bird feed. Their carcasses are going to have the stench fill up the earth after the Great Tribulation, and the birds will consume their flesh. All these different things that you're like, that just doesn't make any sense. It can't be true. Well, Mormonism has the same sort of things. If you lay in bed and you're afraid, well, what if the church is true? Then there's if the church is true, there's a correlation to that. And that is that it's okay for Joseph Smith to take young children into his household as foster children and later secretly propose to them under the idea that God commanded them to enter into marriage, and to keep that secret from Emma, and to do it multiple times. And it's okay for God to use lies and deception to lie to not only the wider world, but even members of the church about secret doctrines regarding polygamy, and to get other people to lie for you. And then it's okay that God had this notion that black people should not receive the priesthood. All of the troubling aspects of church history would have to be okay. And it just doesn't make any sense. And so it doesn't follow. It's one of those things that, you, as you study your way out of the church, as you look at other groups and learn how they manipulate their members into believing, you'll develop your own list of the things that make the least amount of sense and the things that are the, frankly, most offensive to you about the idea that God would do and condone these things. And that will be the list that comes to mind when you consider, wait a second, if the church is true, because there's an earthquake, even though there's been earthquakes all the time in various other places, then I have to accept all these other really reprehensible things. And it just doesn't make any sense. All right. So if you'd like to share your thoughts today, 210-422-2222. Let's take a look at some comments. Rick Skeptical says, I went through an 8.7 earthquake in Chile. I found it to be fascinating and fun. Wasn't happy for the damage and distress caused to people, but was never afraid during the quake or after quakes. And, who knows why, maybe you could explain, Rick, why you didn't feel fear. Was it that you didn't feel fear because you were on a mission and felt like you would be protected by God's hand? Certainly there were people during, any really cataclysmic earthquake event, there are people whose lives are lost or seriously transformed because of the events of that. And it may be one of the things, kind of like when these tragic things are happening in other parts of the world, we don't really take it as seriously or personally because we're not in the middle of it. But suddenly, there's an earthquake in Utah, and we're flipping through scriptures, trying to find the scripture that fulfills it, because it's proof. All right. Christy Stevens says, I'm not happy about the earthquakes, obviously, and I hope everyone is okay, but seeing that Moroni horn ripped off was so satisfying. I did a little dramatic interpretation. I'm sure that's not how she's saying it, but and I can relate. I can understand. It's interesting when you are familiar with Mormon rhetoric and how the church has seen itself as providing the framework of salvation to the world and is the conduit for God's actual work in the world. And then the angel Moroni and that statue, and the idea that it is trumpeting or proclaiming the one true gospel to the world. It's a very ecclesiastically arrogant position to take. And if you're in the believing mindset, it makes perfect sense. But when you step out of that mindset, and particularly when you see your neighbors who aren't Mormon, and they have their own faith traditions that are very sacred and important to them, and in which they find great meaning and comfort, then it comes off as really tone deaf, really arrogant, particularly when you see the faulty foundation upon which the church is built in terms of its very troubling doctrinal history regarding race and polygamy and sexism, and now how they're dealing with the LGBT issue, as well as just outright deception in the life of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and early prophets. That trumpet becomes a symbol of the arrogance of the prophets and the church, and the idea that it self-righteously can assume the level of power that it does in the state of Utah, even in the nation, and that it can sit there and believe that it is the one true way to connect with God, the one true way to find true joy. And it just all seems very arrogant. And so having that trumpet fall, it can be very satisfying metaphorically, because of what that represents. If the trumpet represents the call to the world to conform to Mormonism, having the trumpet fall off of the gilded golden statue of Moroni it has a great deal of metaphoric significance as well. All right, let's see here. Well, while we wait for our next call, I mentioned before how the end times prophecies tend to draw upon people's fear of calamity and everything, and that is very much encoded in the Book of Mormon when Christ came to the New World. And there was a video that I made a few years ago where I asked myself the question, we read the Bible and we read even, it's like the greatest paradox. The Son of God is murdered by Rome, the Roman legal system, when the very people he was sent to save voted that he should be condemned to die while a robber goes free. And yet at that very moment where he is on the cross and he's at the at the threshold of the worst type of pain and torment that a son of God could know, he forgives those people who are doing this to him with the idea that they know not what they do. And it's kind of that example of forgiveness that humans attempt to aspire to in that Christian tradition. And yet, when you read the Book of Mormon, just a few days later, after Christ was forgiving the soldiers and the people who killed him, he goes to the New World. And in the Book of Mormon, 3rd Nephi, chapters 8 and 9, you hear of all this destruction. Well, I thought, what would it look like to actually see the contrast between those two different Christs? Are they actually the same Christ? And this happens around the resurrection of Christ. And so it is a form of an Easter story, but it's a very uniquely Mormon Easter story, because the wider Christian world that doesn't accept or may not even be aware of the Book of Mormon sees the Easter story as being the resurrection of Christ and his appearance and the things that happen there, and that's the end of it. But in Mormonism, there's another story, and that is what Christ does in those times in between his death and when he's not visiting the apostles, when he's alluded to the other sheep that he must visit. And so Mormons kind of have to wrestle with that. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Let me go ahead. I'm going to take off the call thing so we can get through this. It's a little bit long, but that's because you really need to see how gracious and forgiving the Christ of the New Testament is, so that you can really appreciate the Christ of the Book of Mormon. So let's take a look at this. Let's go to our Mormon Easter story video, and we'll take a look at how that appears.
I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known of mine. As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And there shall be one fold,
Rabbi,
and one shepherd.
my little daughter.
Thy faith hath made thee whole. Where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? Neither do I condemn thee. Arise. Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. I say unto thee, arise, and take up thy bed. Rise. Take up thy bed and walk. Go. Wash in the pool of Siloam.
So you can appreciate, we're seeing every type of miracle that Christ is doing in his ministry in the old world. And it just depicts a very loving, compassionate Christ figure. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. So, first of all, I just have to congratulate the church on the production value of their New Testament Bible videos. It's really good. Now, I didn't notice it when I first watched these videos, but the actor that they have play Christ is actually the same actor that they have play Joseph Smith in their church history videos, which is a beautiful bit of I don't even know if it's irony, but it's ironic to those people who see the church saying, no, we don't try to equate Christ with Joseph Smith. We don't try to put them on the same level. I was like, you're using the same actor. But what we saw was just this remarkable, straightforward telling and depiction of the story of Christ, the very beautiful story of Christ from the Bible. And now let's see, contrast that with, we saw the events of Christ's ministry up until his crucifixion, where even when in the midst of excruciating pain, he forgave those people who were doing that to him. The very people who were killing the Son of God. And now we see what is depicted in the Book of Mormon. And to try to show the viewer the visceral feel of it, I found all the destruction footage I could find from all the disaster movies. And when the scripture says, that I buried the earthquakes buried the city, I tried to find some footage that was kind of like that. So it's kind of a very literal depiction of what has gone on. And then I took the audio from the church's own audio reading of it. I can't remember. I think I may have given it a little bit of God reverb so that it really has that power. But let's keep going.
33 years had passed since the people had seen the signs of Jesus Christ's birth. They now watched for the sign of his death, 3 days of darkness. Some did not believe that the sign would come. They argued with those who did believe. One day, a fierce storm came. There was a terrible wind. Lightning flashed and thunder shook the whole earth.
And the city of Zarahemla did take fire, and the city of Moroni did sink into the depths of the sea, and the inhabitants thereof were drowned. And the earth was carried up upon the city of Moroni, that in the place of the city there became a great mountain. And there was a great and terrible destruction in the land southward. But behold, there was a more great and terrible destruction in the land northward. For behold, the whole face of the land was changed because of the tempest, and the whirlwinds, and the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the exceedingly great quaking of the whole earth. And the highways were broken up, and the level roads were spoiled, and many smooth places became rough. And many great and notable cities were sunk, and many were burned, and many were shaken, till the buildings thereof had fallen to the earth, and the inhabitants thereof were slain, and the places were left desolate. And there were some cities which remained, but the damage thereof was exceedingly great, and there were many in them who were slain. And there were some who were carried away in the whirlwind, and whither they went no man knoweth, save they know that they were carried away. And thus the face of the whole earth became deformed, because of the tempests, and the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the quaking of the earth. And behold, the rocks were rent in twain. They were broken up upon the face of the whole earth, insomuch that they were found in broken fragments, and in seams, and in cracks upon all the face of the land. And it came to pass that when the thunderings, and the lightnings, and the storm, and the tempest, and the quakings of the earth did cease, for behold, they did last for about the space of 3 hours, and it was said by some that the time was greater. Nevertheless, all these great and terrible things were done in about the space of 3 hours, and then, behold, there was darkness upon the face of the land. And it came to pass that there was thick darkness upon all the face of the land, insomuch that the inhabitants thereof who had not fallen could feel the vapor of darkness. And there could be no light because of the darkness, neither candles, neither torches, neither could there be fire kindled with their fine and exceedingly dry wood, so that there could not be any light at all. And there was not any light seen, neither fire, nor glimmer, neither the sun, nor the moon, nor the stars, for so great were the mists of darkness which were upon the face of the land. And it came to pass that it did last for the space of 3 days, that there was no light seen. And there was great mourning, and howling, and weeping among all the people continually. Yea, great were the groanings of the people, because of the darkness and the great destruction which had come upon them. And in one place they were heard to cry, saying, Oh, that we had repented before this great and terrible day, and then would our brethren have been spared, and they would not have been burned in that great city Zarahemla. And in another place they were heard to cry and mourn, saying, Oh, that we had repented before this great and terrible day, and had not killed and stoned the prophets, and cast them out. Then would our mothers and our fair daughters and our children have been spared, and not have been buried up in that great city Moroni. And thus were the howlings of the people great and terrible. And it came to pass that there was a voice heard among all the inhabitants of the earth, upon all the face of this land, crying, Woe, woe, woe unto this people, woe unto the inhabitants of the whole earth, except they shall repent. For the devil laugheth, and his angels rejoice, because of the slain of the fair sons and daughters of my people. And it is because of their iniquity and abominations that they are fallen. Behold, that great city Zarahemla have I burned with fire, and the inhabitants thereof. And behold, that great city Moroni have I caused to be sunk in the depths of the sea, and the inhabitants thereof to be drowned. And behold, that great city Moroni have I covered with earth, and the inhabitants thereof, to hide their iniquities and their abominations from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints shall not come any more unto me against them. And behold, the city of Gilgal have I caused to be sunk, and the inhabitants thereof to be buried up in the depths of the earth. Yea, and the city of Onihah, and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Mokum, and the inhabitants thereof, and the city of Jerusalem, and the inhabitants thereof, and waters have I caused to come up in the stead thereof, to hide their wickedness and abominations from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints shall not come up any more unto me against them. And behold, the city of Gadiandi, and the city of Gadiamna, and the city of Jacob, and the city of Gimgimno, all these have I caused to be sunk, and made hills and valleys in the places thereof, and the inhabitants thereof have I buried up in the depths of the earth, to hide their wickedness and abominations from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints should not come up any more unto me against them. And behold, that great city Jacobugath, which was inhabited by the people of King Jacob, have I caused to be burned with fire, because of their sins and their wickedness, which was above all the wickedness of the whole earth, because of their secret murders and combinations. For it was they that did destroy the peace of my people and the government of the land. Therefore I did cause them to be burned, to destroy them from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints should not come up unto me any more against them. And behold, the city of Laman, and the city of Josh, and the city of Gad, and the city of Kishkumen have I caused to be burned with fire, and the inhabitants thereof, because of their wickedness in casting out the prophets, and stoning those whom I did send to declare unto them concerning their wickedness and their abominations. And because they did cast them all out, that there were none righteous among them, I did send down fire and destroy them, that their wickedness and abominations might be hid from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints whom I sent among them might not cry unto me from the ground against them. And many great destructions have I caused to come upon this land and upon this people, because of their wickedness and their abominations. O, all ye that are spared, because ye were more righteous than they, will ye not now return unto me, and repent of your sins, and be converted, that I may heal you? Yea, verily I say unto you, if ye will come unto me, ye shall have eternal life. Behold, mine arm of mercy is extended towards you. And whosoever will come, him will I receive. And blessed are those who come unto me. Behold, I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I created the heavens and the earth, and all things that in them are. I was with the Father from the beginning. I am in the Father, and the Father in me, and in me hath the Father glorified his name.
And, well, that's the question at hand is, are these actually the same Christ? You know, if Christ can be defined by the type of love and forgiveness that he expresses, does it make any sense for Christ in the New Testament to forgive people who kill the very Son of God, compared with, in the Book of Mormon, people who stoned the prophets? Well, they get to have their cities destroyed. In any population of people, there's like 25% are innocent children and women and people that are not stereotypically the iniquitous ones. And so it would have to be okay for God to just murder all of them. You know, people who were not deserving of God's wrath and fury, unless you want to take the idea that the 4-year-olds and the 2-year-olds were actually very evil. You know, they were the ones handing the stones. Here, stone the prophet, Dad. Stone him. Get him. I don't know. It's ridiculous. And when you look at how, even I think Joseph Smith, or the author of the Book of Mormon, is kind of channeling the type of fear and destruction that goes in the Book of Revelations, except it's just depicting it in a much more modern framework in terms of these cities that are burning by fire and all these other things. And I'm sure it made really compelling literature. All right, so we've got a call. Let me see what I can do here. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff. Let me set up the audio real quick to make sure that we have everything good and going. And what's on your mind?
I was just thinking about something that it's kind of been on my mind for a while about the Mormon Church, but I don't know what your thoughts are.
Okay.
Basically, I noticed when researching it that if you look at how they depict the plan of salvation, it actually, it shows that, sorry, I'm a little nervous.
That's okay.
Sorry. It shows that God, that there are two plans. There's the one proposed by Jesus, and there's the one proposed by Satan. And I thought it was interesting that one that proposed by Satan really peace and happiness, proposed by Jesus is painful and is suffering. Or have you ever noticed?
Well, you're describing what I think would be a lot of people's conventional memory of what the competing plans were in the preexistence. And that is that we have the notion that Christ said, well, I've got this plan where people are going to be free to choose, and they're going to then choose righteousness, and that will be how they return to God. And then Satan said, well, I have another plan where everybody's going to be forced and they will not have any choice or free agency, and that is going to be part of it. And so everyone's going to be peaceful, and there will be not a single soul lost. And I grew up with those, vaguely similar descriptions being given forth as the different plans. And the fact that that exists in our culture has been reinforced recently by one of the brethren, David Bednar, speaking in South America to one of their regional meetings that ends up getting broadcast on YouTube. It's not part of the official church broadcast, but I'm always Googling the brethren's name so I can find any of these things that end up getting broadcast in different regions. And he mentions these different stories about the plan. And he says that's actually not what happens. If you go and you look at the scriptures, God puts forth a plan, and then the difference is just Christ's saying, I'll be the one who makes the sacrifice and the glory will be yours. And then Satan says, no, send me and the glory will be mine, or something like that. David Bednar loves pointing out things that everybody has a common, reasonable understanding of, and then saying, you're wrong, and let me tell you how I'm right. And when you go and look, and technically he's right a lot of the times, but I think, for me, one of the things that really comes to mind when you think about Satan's plan is the idea that people will be forced or compelled to obey. And that is supposed to be the contrast between Christ's plan. And there's an understanding, as Mormons teach it, that this notion of free agency and free will is part of the human experience by design. And that means that some people will choose iniquity and some people will choose righteousness. And that distinction and that possibility of evil is part of the narrative very deliberately so that people can feel a measure of security and safety in choosing righteousness. But that's because they've divided the world into less righteous or iniquitous and righteousness based on whether or not you're doing what the prophets say. And when you study church history, you can see that the defining your moral compass by the edicts of the brethren is fraught with danger. When you're talking about just conventional things like be nice, be friendly, don't murder, don't rape, don't steal, yeah, the brethren have a moral position on that, but so does every other religionist everywhere else. The problem comes when they start imposing more kind of proprietary things that don't make any sense unless it's just by divine decree. So drinking coffee or tea is disobeying the prophets, which is the same thing as disobeying God, and so it places you in the category of the wicked, and any other violation that they have. The story about whether or not Satan and his plan will be free of suffering, and whether or not Christ and his plan, it's kind of like just looking at Dr. Doom's plan for the end of the world versus Thanos' plan for the end of the world. I think within the context of people telling a story, it can have significance. And some of that is looking at what are the real themes that the story is trying to impart to people. And so the story of the preexistence in Mormonism does have moral themes that they're trying to impart. Now, they may or may not be good moral themes, but certainly if you're trying to get people to obey the prophets today, then you've got to set up an opposition to that so that people can feel good for choosing righteousness. And it falls into the illusion of free will that is part of the church. The church always says, oh, no, everybody's got their free agency. People that choose to obey the prophets are simply using their moral agency. They're choosing the right for that. It's just when you go back and you look at, is it really free agency or moral agency if you're having to choose between doing what some crusty guy who says that he speaks for God says and doing what you would otherwise do with your own priorities? You have to choose what the crusty guy says on threat of losing your eternal soul and the eternal companionship of your family. That's a spiritually coercive concept that really should not figure in your moral calculation, but the church makes it a part of your calculation. What were your thoughts on it? What was some of the conflicting ideas that brought the question to your mind?
Well, I was raised to think that each person can just do whatever there's right and wrong, but each person can just choose to do good or choose to do bad. That it's not planned out. Because if everything is planned by God, let's say, for example, Adam and Eve, if their fall was planned by God, if he designed it so that they had to do that, you can't punish someone if you've designed it to happen that way. It's like locking someone in the house. The father comes back at the end of the day and says, you've not gone out and done exercise. It's like, yeah, but you locked the door. It's like, I don't care. But you planned this.
Yeah, I think other people have seen that contradiction, and that's where when I studied how the church handles that contradiction, they said, well, there's a difference between something that is a transgression and something that is a sin. And, what Adam and Eve did was a transgression because they violated a parameter that God did, but it wasn't inherently morally evil. And, there's all kinds of twisting of words and gaslighting that go along with that. But you're right, it is a contradiction. And so...
Yeah, how can they be punished? It's like,
yeah.
They got punished.
Well, there's also
what the plan.
Exactly. There's a difference between punishment and consequences. There's any number of different ways that the church can manipulate and mold the words that they use to make it sound plausible. But inherently at the center of all of it is a big contradiction. And I think the church has started to realize that using the term free agency is wrong. And Bednar actually talks about this. He acknowledges that the term free agency has been used by past leaders, and they've done it incorrectly so. And that is because you're not free to do whatever you want. You're free to use your agency to follow the brethren, to follow the prophets, to follow God. These are all the same thing. And that is moral agency, because you're free to do that. But if you do anything else, then you will get the consequences. And it's just, it's kind of a way of stating the obvious, what we all have to deal with in any choice in our lives, but then letting them add their little religious component of it tied to the authority of the brethren that allows them that space to try to exert control over the choices that an individual would make.
Yeah, the whole alcohol thing does seem a little bit arbitrary, and the coffee thing.
Yeah. I mean, there can be good reasons to prohibit alcohol that somebody may phrase it on, but if you're going to make that case, you've got to be able to make it on grounds that are other than because God said so. But even the church has acknowledged that the word of wisdom is not about health. One of the first talks that brother, he was an OBGYN doctor or cardiologist, I can't remember, one of the newer apostles. He gives a talk, and he talks about how, you can't get into a conversation about the word of wisdom on the idea that it has anything to do with health, because critics will say, well, what about the studies that show that there are some potential health benefits to a glass of red wine every night or to drinking coffee? He said, you've got to remember that the word of wisdom is about obedience. And that just reinforces the idea that obedience is very, very central to the Mormon framework of morality. When you're in the temple, and it's often repeated by church leaders and members themselves, that obedience is the first law of heaven. And world history is replete with examples of how placing obedience as a higher moral priority than any other consideration is fraught with danger. And you can look to any tragedy where there have been people who were just following orders that resulted in the slaughter of innocents. You can look at World War II. You can look at the, any instance of a totalitarian government doing that. You can even look in religious groups at every breathtaking tragedy from Jonestown to Heaven's Gate, and obedience is at the center of it. It's just not a moral principle, but Mormonism's elevated to that.
That makes sense.
Well, anything else on your mind? Thank you very much for the call.
That's okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, feel free to call back again sometime on some other show. Thanks for your comments.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care. All right. So if you would like to share your perspective and some of the things going on in your part of the world, then you can call 210-422-2222 and share your thoughts with us. All right. So in the meantime, we talked a little bit earlier about God reverb, verb, and how effective and powerful it is. And there was a point where I really realized that this is a very strategic thing that I will share with you shortly. We got another call. Hello.
Very strategic thing that I will share with you shortly. We got another call.
Hey, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff. There's echo if you want to mute your computer or phone, and you can talk with me directly through the phone.
I just muted it. Hope that's okay.
Yeah.
Jonathan Streeter, you magnificent bastard. I'm so glad to hear you podcasting today. What strange times.
Yeah.
I have a comment, if I may.
By all means.
Can you give me just a quick minute to set this up?
Go ahead.
Okay, here's the thing. All right, John. By the way, this topic it does tie into what's happening. Believe me, I'm not just jumping track completely. But this was something that I was hoping I was going to even contact you, that you might pursue in the future. A topic of the future, that when people the spiritual experiences in the church, some people I've heard several accounts where people are fasting for days and et cetera, especially around times of going on a mission and whatnot, to know if it's true. And this, that, and the other. And I was a young man in 1980, 20 years old. I joined the church. I sat with the missionaries, and I had spiritual experiences, right? So what I felt to be the confirmation of what they were teaching me. I did not know anything about Mormonism at the time. Yet later, when I saw like the steps of indoctrination that cults use, there was a little brochure. Shows a guy, starts off at the crossroads or whatever, and I was at a crossroads of my life. And as I looked at the little brochure thing, I'm like, Jesus, that's my story of joining Mormonism right there. But anyway, my point is, I actually had these so-called spiritual experiences, promise of Moroni, all that came true. Anytime it's mentioned, I'm on it. I've seen what Bill Real has to say about it. I pay attention because it affected me. But here's my point. It was strong enough to where I changed my lifestyle. I was the only member of my family. Not only that, I went on a mission. Not being brought up in the church. I was, Spirit testified to me, blah, blah, blah. I served a mission. It caused me to do that, and then on I go, and the church grind for years and years and years, almost 40 years, because of those experiences, right?
Yeah.
Also, so what the people, LDS members who have ancestors who crossed the plains or whatever, the pioneers, they're very proud of them, as they should be. What people they were to sacrifice like they did for their beliefs. So they had to have something happening before they got, to Salt Lake. So my point is, if the that sure testimony. You know what I mean? I shared testimony many times, and I just knew it was sure and true and all that. Well, it turns out it's not. But so as this is going on, those many people who were in the same trap I am or whatever, did they just know in their heart that it's true, even though things are flaky around them? I've certainly seen many people fail and make bad mistakes in my years in the church, you know what I mean? But the church is perfect. The people aren't. So as people are so committed, it's just part of their being almost. And it drives them to do things they might not normally do. Some of them are very heroic and wonderful, and some of them not so much. So as times of trouble right now, and then I haven't seen the picture yet. I heard that, a trumpet got knocked off of one of the Moroni statues.
Yeah.
You know, and they this, and then and I could see in the comments the feel and vibe from people, like, you know, I've left the church, but now I don't know, and the indoctrination runs deep, and they're all nervous and shaky, as we all are. So my big question is, what do you think that people with such deep conviction caught in this trap they may do? And is there any chance that the President Nelson or one of the guys is going to do something flaky, and then all of a sudden things are going to take a horrible and strange turn in our current situation? What do you think about that? That does that make sense? I'm trying to tie them together because it ties together in my mind. But what do I know?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think you're describing in your own life how a narrative about the nature of truth and spiritual existence that you were introduced to and experienced affected your life in profound ways because of decisions you made on the idea that narrative about truth and that experience was real. And that's very, thank you for sharing your own life's experience on that, but, it can extend even further depending on how close you are and how believing you are to church doctrine. And this is particularly dangerous anytime you have a religious framework that has an end time paradigm about battles and cataclysms and things that happen, because if somebody is a real believer and they're willing to take real physical action based on that belief framework, then you can look at the framework and see some danger zones. So there's a lot of people that criticize the Zionist movement and how closely it's become tied with politics in the United States, and they look at United States' relationship with the Middle East and the different actions that they've taken, and they say that there's a real possibility that people who are trying to bring about the political and societal substrate of the apocalypse have inappropriately interfered in our political relationships with that belief framework motivating their actions. In Mormonism, there's a very similar sort of paradigm because Joseph Smith talked so significantly about his belief that world government and religious government should be fused under what he called theodemocracy, and that there were very real reasons for this that included all of the end-time narratives, that some of which we saw in Kwaku L's post. All of those have really real consequences if people in positions of power start to act on them. And we're seeing in some of the offshoots, the people who break away from the church and claim that they have, divine connection themselves and gather followers around them with this idea that they can take actions that will prevent their followers from suffering the same calamities that the rest of the world. All of this are just expressions of that first seed of belief and whether or not it's real. So I think the concerns that you have that some of these leaders in the church may may make some misstep or some action based on these belief frameworks, and it could have bad consequences. I think that's a real risk. But I think the church general, the multi-billion-dollar corporate church that we have now, is much more inclined not to do that. And some of that is the result of their own kind of internal structure. The idea that they've already put out there that nothing is official church policy or doctrine unless it's the combined expressed will of the brethren and the first presidency. And we've seen certainly recent missteps regarding the November 2015 policy and the reversal on that. That's very much centered in that body of brethren, the Q15. Things like the BYU Honor Code are a bit removed from that because they can always put the blame at the BYU administration offices. But certainly the 2015 LGBT baptism and marriage issue is close to that. But that's very different from the types of consequences of belief that we saw, for example, in the Mountain Meadows massacre, or that we see in any of these other offshoot end times groups. So,
right, but what if the local? But I don't know. Local leaders have some leeway. I know I'm still on some mailing lists, and there are 2 wards I attended, but it's because they combined, so it just worked out that way. But I saw one post from a bishop who says, "Hey, you guys, worthy priesthood holders," a very disturbing term in my opinion. But anyway, priesthood holders, you do have permission to do the sacrament in your homes, and whatever. And then then the message from the other bishop said, "No, nobody can do sacrament." Blah 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 blah. So it's like I'm already seeing conflicts in these smaller things.
Yeah. I think there's an explanation, and that is that bishop who said no is a judge in Israel, and he knows that none of the priesthood holders are worthy in his district, whereas the other one has worthy priesthood holders. So that's the difference there. No, it all goes back to, you want decisions that you make and actions that you endorse to be based on fact, objective fact, real data to the best of our ability. And so, if you listened to John DeLynne's short episode yesterday on the fact that the church is continuing to have missionaries proselytize, it's continuing to have patriarchs give blessings in their home. And several people who wrote into him said, the mission president or the temple president has assured them that they'll be safe because they're not at risk, or they feel safe because they'll be working in the temple and it's a protected area. God has promised his protection. And anytime you're using those, religious justifications to override the prudent, evidence-based recommendations of the wider secular world, you're in danger. You don't want to override the faculties of logic, reason, evidence that we use to understand the world around us based on the religious decrees or themes that men give you, because that's where you really are in danger. So I hope that that is not happening. I hope that people are paying attention to the recommendations of the CDC, of the World Health Organization, and then holding that up in comparison to what local leaders tell them, because local leaders are not trained. They don't have a wider view of what's going on, and there's real danger if they're continuing to put other people at risk through that type of behavior.
Right. Yeah, and missionaries are just carriers showing up from door to door. But also, I just hope that everybody remember. Well, how do most TBMs know? Because I certainly didn't for all those years. I may have heard the term Danites in passing, but I didn't realize that in our own church history that Danites under order went out and killed people thinking they were saving their souls. I don't want that to happen in my time, any worse than it's already happened with their faiths. But it's very sobering. Now, our church history is fascinating and very sobering. I don't know.
Yeah.
By the way, as I watched you and you, Bill Rill, and you, I love you guys together as well. You guys seem to just, I hear something, but that's really good. Should I write that down? and it's like, how are they coming up with all this stuff off the cuff all the time? And so I just think that my grandmother used to tell me that, called her Nana. She used to say that, hey, you're a pretty fart smeller. I think that you guys are pretty smellers. That's what I'm saying.
I'll accept that I'm a pretty fart smeller.
There you go. All right. Hey, thanks for taking my call. Thanks for being there and for your opinion and everything. You're doing great. Really appreciate it. And take care and be well, okay?
All right. Take care. You too. All right. So let's see. We had somebody... Well, make sure I don't lose my train of thought. Do we have... Oh, yeah. So the God voice. So I was doing some research. Let me go ahead and share the particular tab. If I hit share screen and I look at that tab and share the audio. I was doing research. I wanted to see, what does it look like when the church actually announces the lifting of the priesthood ban? So you go to the October 1978 General Conference and you look at the Saturday afternoon session, the first speech by N. Eldon Tanner, Revelation on Priesthood Accepted. And you can go there and you can, hold on, let's see here. Hopefully it'll start playing. You can hear and view the announcement that was made to the world that the restriction on the priesthood was lifted. And it's a really fascinating video because you get a little bit of a look at what, church life used to be like. But when you listen to it, when he first starts talking, the God reverb is not on, and then they flip the switch and it starts. And it was just like, what? You're kidding me? Because I always thought that was just the natural acoustics of the environment. But this, it's subtle. You have to really kind of turn your speakers up and listen to it, but it's there. Let's see if we can find it.
In early June of this year, the First Presidency announced that a revelation had...
Did you hear it? When he says in early June of this year, it's just like normal audio, and then suddenly, click, the God reverb starts. Let's listen to that again.
...been received by President... In early June of this year, the First Presidency announced that a revelation had been received by President Spencer.
Anyway, I just really enjoyed seeing that little glimpse into it. This video is very fascinating when you watch it. He reads the revelation, and then
servants and prepare.
He asks for a sustaining vote. It's actually very significant that N. Eldon Tanner was the guy who read this because he was one of the most vocal and critical racists that completely hammered down on some of the racist themes. When you see them call for the vote, they ask for the sustaining votes, and they show a camera at the audience. You can see a bunch of hands go up. Let's see if we can find that.
Recognizing Spencer W. Kimball as the...
Let's see if we can find it. Hold on.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints of the Church, Hartman Richter Jr., A. Calamar.
All right, come on.
The Relief System.
Releasing. Okay, maybe it's in here. Well, okay, I think this is close because you can see. All right, what does it say? All right.
And President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. All in favor, please make it manifest.
Okay, you see all the hands, all the crowd, all the people in the red seats.
Sign.
And then when they do the all the opposed, they only show the red seats. And for people that are in the know, the red seats are the prophets and apostles and the 70. Those are the seats of authority. This is back before they allowed women to sit in the the fancy red seats. But they don't show the opposed because if you talk to people who were there, who saw how this issue was accepted by the church, there were a lot of people who were not happy with it. And I would not be surprised if the camera had allowed the audience to be seen in the opposed, that a significant number of hands would have been raised. But that's because you have to promote the mythology of unanimity so that you can prove the proof of anything that you were doing. All right, so let's stop that. There was something else that came to mind as the last caller was speaking, and that is this whole mythology of truth. And the reason that a lot of us accepted what the church taught and the real true nature and factual historical nature of the Book of Mormon and the events depicted in the Book of Mormon was because of this truth paradigm or this truth myth that we were given. We were told that if you pray, if you fast and pray, you'll have an experience, and that experience is proof of the divinity of the work, of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon and the reality of it all. And this is why you get people sharing that meme of Han Solo saying it's true, all of it, about the Book of Mormon. And that idea where somebody has given you a recipe for truth is not unique to Mormonism. And there's a meme that's been going around on the web that I thought was really instructive on this point. And let me share it with you now. If I go to, let's see, that's called Stressed. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, so many of you have probably seen this particular image. Let me move the banner out of the way. I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit if I can. Okay, so now it's an image that is like this. Now, I want you to just stare at the screen and just free your mind, and you're probably going to perceive that something is moving on the screen. You're going to perceive that there's a rotational element to the middle part of the screen, and that the sphere on the side is also rotating in a different way. And that perception of motion is going to seem very real to you no matter where you look at it. then if you move your eyes, it'll stop for a moment and then it'll come back again. And so this is an optical illusion. And all it does is it capitalizes on some very real facts about how our eyes work and how our brain perceives motion and perceives shadow and light. And this is just one of those images that reveal that aspect of normal human physiology. But this meme is going around with something other than the simple optical illusion. It is giving you a truth narrative about the optical illusion. So with this image, it says, this image was created by a Japanese neurologist. If the image is still, you are calm. If the image moves a bit, then you're stressed. And if it moves like a carousel, you are very, very stressed. Tell me how you are doing. And so they provided this image, and then they provided a set of truths to go along with how you perceive the image and how you experience the image. The thing is that those rules about the truths that you can get from your perception of the image are completely made up. There is no Japanese neurologist. Some versions of this meme actually give you a name, and it's a fictional character. On top of that, there is no correlation between your stress level and your perception of this image. You are going to always perceive this image the way that you are because of how your eyes interpret color, shadow, and shape. And it's just a true part of normal physiology. So this is just an example of how people can subject you to an experience that has a very predictable and reproducible outcome, but then give you a set of truths to go along with it that if you are not critical in how you accept this truth paradigm, then you may accept it. You'll be like, oh my God, I'm really stressed. But what if they said, if you perceive this image to be rotating, then the Book of Mormon is true, or then the Spirit is real in having a power in your life, or any number of just arbitrary claim tied to your experience of this. Well, you can see how that is a false correlation and is something that can be used to manipulate you. Well, the way that they describe the truth paradigm of the Moroni challenge, where if you pray with enough intent, with sincere, real intent to know the truthfulness of it, then it'll be manifest unto you. Well, that's even more effective because they don't tell you exactly how you're going to feel it. They leave that up to your own personal interpretation. So anything that you may feel that your mind chooses to associate with a special experience is going to be something that you can then render an interpretation. Oh, well, that experience is the fulfillment of the Moroni's promise. And then you'll take that experience, that truth experience, and now it holds a special place in your mind. And now because of your experience there, you now have to do what the leaders of that organization have. What if this meme that was circulating says a Japanese neurologist says that you're stressed if you feel this, and then if you accept this, if you experience it, then now you have to do everything the Japanese neurologist and all the people who hold his seat thereafter, everything that they tell you to do about how you live your life, how you view your world, how you view yourself. And you can see that it's a key to tapping into somebody's free agency, free will, and it will affect the choices that you make in the future if you are not critical about how you accept truth paradigms and then act on them and allow them to color your life. So if you see this meme, it's a really fascinating experience just of all, because it is real. You are going to experience that sense of rotation, but it's not connected in any way to the supposed truths and the figure who supposedly made it. So that was a fun diversion from that. All right, so let's see here. If you would like to call and share some of your thoughts, you can dial 210-422-2222 and let us know what's on your mind. Somebody else earlier talked about how they were incredulous that the church would actually use the same actor for the Book of Mormon that they were using for Joseph Smith as that they would use for Christ. And I found an image that actually shows that side by side. Let's take a look so we can see. Yeah, we won't comment on the top part of this. That's it's kind of a weak criticism against the church, so I'm not going to work that. But you can see that, yes, in fact, it is the same actor that they use for Jesus Christ in the Book of Mormon, or the Old and New Testament videos that they use for Joseph Smith in the church history videos. He's a sharp-looking guy. I don't blame them for doing that. Clearly, the appearance of 19th century post-colonial America white guy is very similar to the person born in the Middle East at the meridian of time. So let's go back to some comments while we wait for our next caller, 210-422-2222. Let me just set up the voice to receive the next call when that happens, and then we'll return to this. All right, so Kenneth D says, the reverb does add a false gravitas. If you increase the playback speed on YouTube, you can remove the reverb. I have never tried that. That's an interesting thing. It makes sense a little bit, because reverb, when you look at audio technology, it takes your voice and then it just adds a very subtle stretching out or echo of that really gives a sense of the space, and we affiliate it with the cathedral, and it adds power and gravitas. Somebody says, anyone know why the church doesn't produce a modern translation of the Book of Mormon? King James English is classic and elegant, but it's not how we communicate today. This is a good point, but it's also kind of the same thing where the reverb that is employed gives us a sense of importance or gravitas or greater weight to what is being said. By the same token, King James English also gives, we just accept it. It just flows very naturally into our minds as scripture because it's in that King James English. All right, we've got a call. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff. What is on your mind?
Hello. I just wanted to call and say thank you. If it wasn't for you and a couple of other YouTubers, I wouldn't currently be thinking the way I am. So, thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about your journey.
I grew up in the church, and until maybe when I was 17, I completely believed in absolutely everything they said. Yeah. Not joking, every single bit and piece. And it wasn't until I think it was Telltale that I first watched. It was like some crazy Mormon beliefs that they have, and I was like, that's weird. And then I went away for like a couple of years, and then I continued watching Telltale's like cult stuff, and I started watching Mr. Atheist, and I found you, and it's just...
I think I may have lost your call. We'll see if your cell signal comes back. Hello? Are you there?
Hello?
There.
Did
we
I
lost
cut
you
out?
we lost you for a little bit. You were mentioning how
gosh.
You had seen some other podcasters, Mr. Atheist, and then this podcast, and that they had kind of changed your perspective on that. How are you, how far out are you now on that journey? Are you years, months?
Couple of years, though I still live with my parents, and they kind of know, but I can't really completely separate myself.
Yeah.
So I was actually wondering if there's any, I'm still forced to go to church and stuff, and it's better if I just decide it, because that's going to cause a lot of disruption in the family.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if there's any way I can, besides just completely ignoring what they say, if there's a way I can break down what they're saying and try and figure out how they're trying to manipulate people.
Well, I think, there's a couple of things. Anytime you're in any of those meetings, if you do hear something that is just, I guess, morally or ethically wrong, then there is a way to talk about it in a way that does not become confrontational, at least so that you can feel like you participated in the conversation. And many times that would be just like taking the perspective of an outsider. You can just bring up, not as though it's your perspective, but I have friends who are not in the church, and when they consider this issue, these are some of the things that they bring to bear. How do we respond as believers what do you think? Is there anything to their argument? And it's a way to not have people immediately become defensive. Now, it's really easy for me to say this. I'm terrible at this. Because if I'm in that context, I'd be like, well, what about this and this and this? And you're wrong. And it's just, and then everything, the spirit leaves the room and it's terrible. I'm horrible at it. So I don't want to put out like I'm really good at this. I'm not. But, there can be a way to do that. I feel like if you're attending the meetings and you're not a believer and you silence yourself and you say, there's no way at all that I can engage in the conversation, it becomes it's an overused word, but it becomes a toxic environment. It becomes an environment where you, in a sense, are putting a muzzle on your own identity, and it's just a very hard space to occupy, and it will become harder, and it'll become more of a toll on you individually and personally if you feel like you can't express yourself at all for fear of the repercussions. I know that there are circumstances where people really have to walk a very delicate line, and it sounds like you may be in that circumstance, but
my parents aren't as controlling as others have been, and so I still can't talk to some friends about it and whatnot. So I have a couple of people I can share about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of frustrating though at times, and I'm like, no, you're wrong. And that's just all that goes through my head, but I'm not going to say it.
Yeah. I mean, it's never a good idea to start with "you're wrong."
I know.
But certainly, I found like it's even easier just to talk about moral principles. One of my most memorable conversations started about the concept of genocide, and I think if you can just get people to agree that genocide is one of those absolute evils, because you're talking about killing a body of people because of the nature of their race or ethnicity, and that includes killing innocents as well as anyone else. And, I mean, if people can agree that that's wrong, then that at least gives you a stake in the ground that then you can talk around. So then if you have a lesson where God is punishing people for not committing genocide, you can say, well, hey, hold on a second. How can we accept that genocide is an absolute evil, and then a man claiming to be a prophet saying God has commanded you to commit genocide? And so that's a discussion that people can have, and they have to, well, we do need to make sense of this. And then you can take that to other things. If I can accept that it is, it should never be right for a person who is a foster parent to secretly propose to their teenage steward, the person that they have stewardship over. That would be a violation of trust, and it doesn't matter what age you live in. That is just a highly inappropriate thing. Well, then now you can have a conversation of, well, how do we make sense of the fact that Joseph Smith did this? Because there are a lot of people who are leaving the church believing that this is evidence that what he claimed to be a revelation was not, and that he was acting out of his own lust or anything. And that that's a harder one, because you're treading on very, very sensitive ground, because Mormons hold Joseph Smith and his legacy in such high esteem. But at least you have a way to approach it that's not directly, you're wrong.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, my heart goes out to you. I know it can be difficult, but there are times as you go through this journey. There's going to be times where the anger and the frustration is really what motivates and drives you, and then once you get some of that out of your system, you'll be able to approach things much more calmly and measuredly, and it'll be easier to interact with your family, your loved ones, your friends. And you have an understanding of how their perceptions of you, their perceptions of the world are colored by the messaging that the church gives them, and work around that and still see them and value them for who they are and what they are, still appreciate the positive aspects of what the church does for them, and maybe use that as a basis for continuing a relationship without having to always focus on the bad stuff.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the call, and best wishes on the days ahead.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. Take care. Okay, so we covered the truth illusion, and we covered Joseph and Jesus being by the same actor. Let's take a peek in how them dirty manipulative cults are doing. Because if we take a look at the Jehovah's Witness website, and we can see what they're talking about. So you can go to jw.org, and you can see that they have the 4 horsemen of Revelation, the prophecy about the rider of the pale horse. I mean, they're really tapping into any bad things that happen, and they can use it to use fear to bind their members closer in depending on the leaders for the, for them to have a sense of well-being. They tie all their stuff into scripture. It's funny how similar their website is to the Mormon website. They use the same shade of blue for all of their accent colors, or at least the same shade the Mormon church used to use. But they just have a whole bunch of crap. And, there is better times ahead in their paradigm, but it's all contingent upon obeying the things that their governing body tells you what to do. You can just go and see how they're capitalizing on this moment to use fear. They're talking about the last days and end times. They do have something about protecting yourself from disease. When you click on it, they're using biblical examples and plagues, and it's just very interesting. It's almost like nothing will have any significance unless they can see it through the lens of the of the Bible. It's like, do we pay attention to things that secular world organizations may be saying if they're not framing the entire thing through the Bible? And it's a really difficult perspective to see through when you realize that that's how they're approaching it. It's pretty scary, because you want them to be able to understand and accept the authorities who manage public health, who manage disease and epidemics and epidemiology. You want them to be able to accept those authority figures based on their training and experience, even if it has nothing to do with the Bible. And there's this seed of distrust that is really sown in the minds of people who only look at issues through the framework of the Bible, because then if some secular world authority is trying to tell them what they can do to best protect themselves and their family, there's this element of, well, do I really trust you? You're not within the religious framework that I look to for all the other truth in my life. And different groups have different different weighting of this particular aspect of how they perceive truth in the world around him, and Jehovah's Witnesses are pretty strong in that. There are some other videos that they have which talk about, I was pulled this up the other day, I wonder if it is still here. It talks about how they have implemented a disaster relief plan that is a hierarchy that extends from their governing body all the way down to their local organizations. And it is sort of a parallel to some of the messages that you've seen from the church today about how the structure of the church and the organization of the church is designed to help people survive these calamities. This is their video where they talk about supporting brothers when epidemics and disasters strike. And you'll see reflected in the Jehovah's Witness video that people feel empowered to take action when their religious hierarchy gives them permission to do so. If you watch the video, at one point they talk about how when we immediately notified the governing body, we received a message back, and then we knew what to do. And the danger there is where they're ignoring other authorities who may also give them advice about what to do that's grounded more in reality. All right, let's see. We got another call. Hello, you are on Talk on Things and Stuff. Give me a moment as I set up the call audio, and now you are online. How are you doing today?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well.
First, let me just say thank you so much for your show. I've only recently been introduced to it, and I'm really grateful. I was in the church.
Can you repeat that again? I think you cut out.
When I was in such
Unfortunately, it sounds like whatever signal your phone is coming in on, it's breaking up so much that we're not able to hear you.
Type of situation, because my husband had left the church.
Okay, I'm sorry that line was breaking up so much that we couldn't hear anything. If you can try to get on a solid line and call back, we would love to hear your experience. And I'm sorry that that call did not work out. You can call back at 210-422-2222. I know sometimes it's difficult because we only have access by cell phones. It's just that if the signal is so weak that we can't hear anything, then it's hard to have the conversation. So if you can get to a landline or move to an area with stronger signal, then call back at 210-422-2222. Okay. And I'm finishing the data point about the Jehovah's Witness thing. When they feel empowered to act when they're given direction from their religious authority, then they're acting based on the judgment and guidance of that authority. And we're seeing examples in Mormonism how that same paradigm of waiting to take action until you hear from the religious authority and prioritizing that over looking to secular authorities that are basing their recommendations around the real lived experience of people without regard to religious dogma or anything like that. And that's why you have mission presidents who are still sending missionaries proselytizing door to door. And the rationalization that they put forward is that, well, COVID-19 only affects old people in the dramatic way, and so our young people are safe. But that's not looking to the broader picture of the fact that those young people then become carriers and they can spread the disease to other people and increase the number of people who become critically ill, even if it is not them themselves, and that exacerbates the problem that we're trying to avoid, which is making adjustments so that we don't overwhelm our critical care hospital resources as a nation. So if you are a member, if you are in communication with your missionary, and they tell you that their mission president is still sending them out proselytizing, well, you have an opportunity now to educate your what I like to call grown-ass adult children about boundaries and about their own individual autonomy and about how they themselves can monitor the news, the CDC, the World Health Organization, that they can claim that for themselves and they're not wicked or iniquitous for doing it, and that mission presidents don't know everything and it's okay for them to take action themselves. They are volunteers. They are not conscripted into the military. They're not going to be subject to a court-martial if they start taking self-empowering actions for the protection of themselves and for the protection of others with an understanding of how this works. All right. Carol Johns talks about how when I was a believing member, I felt falsely protected by my beliefs, even when in dangerous circumstances. I can understand that. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hi.
Hi, what's on your mind?
I'm wondering. I'm calling from Sweden. I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Am I live? Because I can't hear the audio from YouTube. Okay.
There's a little bit of a delay.
Sorry. All right. So I'm calling from Sweden. I had a question. Do you have an experience heard about people using the GDPR from the EU to resign?
I have not heard that. You're talking about using some system other than Quit Mormon or direct communication with the church in order to resign your membership from the church?
Yeah, that's right. There's a German website with English text that helps members in the EU to resign with that system. But I was thinking of, like, I resigned 4.5 years ago. But the thing is, in the law, it says that I can get the information that the church have about me, and then I can make them destroy it. But I'm so curious of what that information could entail, and that would be illegal for them to keep that, right?
Yeah. I'm looking at the website now, or one of the websites, and this is not as familiar to me because in the United States we don't have this particular law governing the private personal information that a non-governmental organization or a private religion would store on people. But it looks like you're right. There's in chapter 3, under the heading of rights of the data subject, it talks about that if one of these organizations collects data on individuals, then there are certain rights that the individual has that it can request of the organization. That adds a very interesting dynamic to people who are concerned that the church may have files on them. My question is how vigorous are laws like this enforced or supported if you report a violation? Do you know?
I'm really not sure. But the thing is that it would be interesting to see if they, I mean, from people who have rejoined the church, and they do have kept the records, it will be interesting to see what kind of information is still there. And also, if it's there, but they should have removed it, I mean, they can be fined for every case. I think it's up to 10 million euros. So, I mean, that would be a great way to get your tithing money back.
Well, hold on, though. Does the money go to you or does it go to the EU?
No, but just a feeling.
Yeah. No, you make an interesting point where people who are under the jurisdiction of that law may be able to avail themselves of whatever procedure is outlined there to not only resign, but also to get that data and information. And I think... usually the intentions of laws like that are to hold organizations accountable for the way that they treat the data and the information of private individuals that voluntarily interact with them. And so certainly if the people in Europe who are interested in increasing the accountability and transparency of the church become familiar with that law and act on it, I'd be very interested to see how the church responds to it. I've gotten some private communications from people in Europe in the past showing how there have been examples of the church flouting the law in regards to requirements that they have for people to have background checks and training to prevent and mitigate child sexual abuse, and how when those laws went into effect requiring organizations to do that, the church was far behind the curve and didn't really expect to have to follow those guidelines. So it may be that in the future some leak of that evidence supporting that will come out. And this is just all with the theme of trying to get the church to move with the times regarding what is expected for transparency, all under the heading of trying to reduce the amount of abuses, the amount of fraud that takes place in any organization, and protecting the rights of the individual. So it's an interesting point. Thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah.
How are you guys in Sweden dealing with the changes under the heading of social distancing and everything else?
Repeat that. Social what?
Are you guys having to do these social distancing? Are businesses closing down and people instructed to stay at home? That's what we're seeing in America.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally I haven't been totally up to date at the latest, but yes, it's getting more and more restricted. Like I think high school and everything is starting to close down and stuff, but they still keep middle school or whatever it's called up for now.
Really?
But that could change rapidly. Yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing
closing down.
Very rapid changes here. I think just even a week ago, I don't know that we would have been able to predict things were what they are right now. So certainly, I think we're all trying to be aware of the changes and keep on track with these things. So I appreciate your call.
Yeah.
And
thank you so much.
If you have any experience with that or learn of anyone that uses that, then by all means, let me know. Share that story because that's a very interesting thing.
I will.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah.
All right. Where have you been? Huh? You leaving me all by myself? I don't have any treats. You ate all the treats, Yugi. Get your butt out of my microphone, Yugs. Okay. Well, we are approaching 2 hours, and I wanted to give a chance for the one caller who called in but had a line that was broken up to be able to call back because I would love to hear your story. If you're able to call back 210-422-2222. Rick Skeptical says that he saw a video of bearing their testimony about Marshall Applewhite, who was the leader of the Heaven's Gate group that tragically ended in a mass suicide. He said there's hardly any difference than what you hear in LDS Fast and Testimony meeting. I found that video and I wanted to make sure that it was preserved, so I have it as a video on my website, and you can hear it. It is very sobering. Hello, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Hi, I called earlier. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you much better now. Thank you for calling back.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for having me. I'm really grateful for your show. I was in the church for about 20 years, and I left about 2 years ago.
Were you a convert?
Fortunately for me, your other caller that called, unlike earlier, I was a convert. I got converted at the age of like 17. And at the time, it was so funny because I really looked up to the people who introduced me to the church. You know, I think I sort of revered them. And I figured, you know, these are intelligent, successful people. They wouldn't be involved in anything that's, you know, wrong or stupid.
Yeah.
And I spent, you know, 20 plus years of my life just totally devoted to this church and giving so much. I used to be so judgmental of even my husband, my son, when they didn't want to come with me. And, you know, I think I sort of looked down on everyone without even realizing it. But I look back now and I realize it was just so much mind control that was going on that you know, when you're in it, you think you're doing the very best thing and then everybody else are just sinners. Yeah. But then you step back and you realize, oh my gosh, I've been controlled all of this time without even realizing. My comment was, though, I wanted to just talk about, you know, I saw the video that Russell M. Nelson put out, you know, amidst this COVID-19 pandemic. And I thought to myself, if this man is really, you know, the prophet of God, is that all he has to say? Because I feel like everything in the church, in my experience, everything has always been do more, pray harder, give more, you know, pay your tithing. And of course, that's a big one, pay your tithing, you know, fast. And it was, the onus just always seemed to be on you to do, like you weren't doing enough. And so you kind of got the sense that you were trying to earn your way into heaven. We can't ever earn our way into heaven, because then why would we need Jesus?
Yeah.
You know, it just doesn't make sense to me. And for so long, I felt like I was never good enough. And you kind of always have that feeling because you're trying to live up to these unrealistic expectations and standards that really and truly, I mean, who can achieve that? And even if you feel like you can achieve that, it's not sustainable, you know? And so I always felt like I was less than, and I went through so much depression because of it, because I always felt like, oh, my family's not in the church, and, you know, they're not doing the right thing, and I'm not doing the right thing, and we can never have an eternal family because of that. And it was just so much stress on me. And then when I stepped away, it was like someone flipped on a switch after 20 years. And it was like, hallelujah, I finally got it, you know. But I just kind of wanted to make that comment and just, you know, thank you so much for your show. I really appreciate all your efforts. And, you know, even now, like when I watch the General Conference talks, I used to love, you know, like Elder Holland. He was my favorite speaker. And now I look at it and I have such a different feeling when I watch General Conference, because I can see through the mind control. Yeah. I can actually read between the lines, and every message, everything is just putting the onus on you to make sure that you're obedient, not obedient to just what is good and right, but obedient to what they say.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the thing that gets you. And I just want to encourage anyone out there, you know, I know that there are lots of people that, you know, have families in the church, and it's a big thing to leave. But if you feel in your heart that it's not right, you need to do the right thing. And I'm not trying to force anybody to do anything, but I know for me, I spent 20 plus years in it, and I haven't looked back. I mean, it's only been 2 years, but I haven't looked back. And even though I haven't found another church as such, it just, nothing about that church feels right to me anymore. And I feel happy. I'm happier for it. So, you know, that's it. So thanks for your show, and thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for your story. I think I can very much relate to what you're talking about in terms of when you're in that believing space, you don't see yourself as judgmental. I mean, and you can cite numerous times where the church says, you know, Christ teaches us that he only can judge and we can't judge them. And so you don't see, and if someone were to criticize you and say, you Mormons are so judgmental, you'd be like, what are you talking about? We treat everybody equally and fine. But, you know, just because you yourself believe that you have to obey the commandments of the brethren, then you are judging yourself by that standard.
Yes.
And just judging
exactly
yourself by that standard affects how you view the world around you. And it's one of those things that you don't realize because it's just a subtle part of the air that you breathe in that space. And then for me, like, I didn't realize it at all until I, let go of those beliefs that were based on, a false narrative and a false paradigm, and just re-examined everything. And then when I considered how I used to judge myself and the world, because those are one and the same, the same lens through which you're judging yourself is how you're judging the world. And I realized that it colored all of the relationships that I have, and it comes out in subtle ways that, just in some cases you're not even in control of,
Yeah, I mean, if I have a cup of coffee, that means I'm a terrible person and I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
Like, really? I mean, come on. There are worse things I could do. You know what I mean? But that would make me feel so guilty because you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm committing a serious crime here, and it was just so much pressure all the time. And, just everything that you're expected to do on top of your everyday lives was just so unrealistic, so... Yeah. I really empathize with people who have families that force them to stay and who are not supportive of when, they want to leave, because religion, spirituality is a very personal choice. And to me, I think the best thing is to just try and connect with God, try and connect with the divine, and not let anything or anyone else get in the way of that. And that's kind of all I have to say.
Yeah. Well, the center of all of these things is really that your perception of the church, and by extension your perception of yourself, is really significantly affected by the truths that you accept as the premise for your perspective. Yeah. And once you let go of the idea that everything the church tells you is objective reality, and you allow for other possibilities, then absolutely it changes the way that you'll see these men. It changes the way that you listen to not only the church, but even other people who then tried to capture you with their own dogma. That's one of the dynamics. I enjoy speaking with other Christians and listening to their perspectives, but there have been instances where I'm listening to a particular person sharing their Christian perspective, and there are threads of the same types of manipulative controls that they use in how they frame what they say, and it becomes very distasteful to me. So
yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
well,
thank you so much for your call. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. There was something that I'm trying to see if I can find that was triggered by something that she said. If I can go to YouTube and see it. There's I've talked before in a video about the show called The Path. That is a Hulu show, and I got in trouble for using a clip from it, and I'll probably get in trouble again for using it. But there's a really remarkable segment of that video that I did a kind of analysis of, and there's a moment where one of the people who has left the group is talking with a former girlfriend. His brother committed suicide, and it was in the midst of his grief over the death of his brother that he was recruited into the group. And that is because the group found him at a very vulnerable time and then exploited his vulnerability to use his grief and the answers that they provided and the love bombing that they provided as a way to reframe and get around it. And so he became a very faithful adherent of the group. And somebody else talks about, well, because they were never part of the group, and they're like, well, what about this group? It gave you such meaning, and it was just such an important part of your life. And he talks about the different perspective from being a believer to being somebody who has lost their belief, and how it completely changes your perspective. And it was so well written, so well performed. I want to see if I can share that with y'all now. Let me see if I can bring this up. If you Google The Path, It Only Works If You Believe, then you'll see the discussion on that. I forget what I had to say on it, so unfortunately you'll have to put up with my commentary on it. And then we'll probably close out with this particular video. Let's see if we have... All right, It Only Works If You Believe, and we'll go full screen and see what that has to say. series called The Path, which is a story of a religious movement that meets a lot of the criteria that people would have for unethical controlling organizations. Some people call them cults. It tells the story of a family, and one guy in particular, Eddie, who was not born in the organization but joined it when he was younger after his brother died. And he was looking for something to hold on to, something to believe in, and he found this organization that really helped him put his life back together, to find purpose and meaning. He was able to find a young woman to marry and to start building a family. And at the beginning of this series, it really seems like he has everything together. And the group is doing a lot of good work. They have a lot of great friendships and teachings which really help them know where they are in the world and what's expected of them and where they're going. Throughout the series, in the first season in particular, Eddie starts to learn information about the group and its leaders that he didn't know previously. And he starts to see some of the darker side of their teachings. He meets an apostate, somebody who used to believe and be a part of the organization but left after learning things. And his perception about the organization starts to change. And I think the script writers, the actors, everyone involved with this show does a phenomenal job of really conveying that type of just paradigm shifting, earth shattering transition that happens when you depart from a faith that has really been your entire existence. There's one scene in the second season, in the second episode, that I think articulates a point that's really difficult to convey sometime. I'm going to have you watch the scene and then we'll talk briefly about it. You're going to see Eddie's now apart from his family because when you leave the organization, there's a degree of shunning that takes place. And he's met up with the old girlfriend of his brother who died. And they have a little bit of an argument. He's still coming to terms with being outside of the group. She comes to him and is trying to find information about the group because she sees that the group kind of helped him put his life back together after his brother died. And his response, I think, has a great deal of insight. So let's just take a look.
When Johnny died, I had nothing. I had no answers as to why it happened. You know, and I had nowhere to go. And you found somewhere to go. I mean, you found a place that has the answers that you need. You know, it probably saved your life.
Dad.
Yeah. And who's gonna judge you for that, huh? Not me.
You know, they did save me. And it was beautiful for so long to have a story that just contained it. You know, just held it all. But it only works when you believe. Because once you pull that thread, it just turns into nothing right in your hands.
I thought this was so well thought out and so well placed. He basically says, you know, the group did help him through one of the darkest chapters of his life. When his brother had died, he didn't know what his own purpose was, what he was going to make of his own life, or how to get out of the drugs and the violence and everything that he was involved in at the time. He found the group and it gave him a sense of purpose. It ultimately gave him a family. It gave him stability. And all of that was something that he says saved him. But then when he started to learn about the dark aspects of the group, the parts that were hidden, the parts that weren't true, it changed his perspective. And as soon as he realized that all of the messages, all of the sayings, all the symbolism, all of everything was not based in anything that was legitimate, but was simply fictional creation of a charismatic spiritual healer type person, then it lost its ability to provide that comfort because it was not real. And I think that a lot of people who have left the Mormon church go through a similar sort of thing. Even when you go back and you think about how you were able to understand the world around you, as long as you believe it all, as long as you all believe that it's true, then it is very helpful. You know, when you think about family members dying, if you believe Mormonism is true, then it gives you a great deal of hope and security that you'll see them again, that you'll have an eternal family. You know, I understand this myself. When I was a teenager, my father and several of my siblings died in a car wreck. And I felt like this, you know, my knowledge of the gospel and the church and the eternal plan of salvation helped me to deal with that grief better, because I believed that it was true. I believed that the person that told us about those things, Joseph Smith, and the prophets, had the authority and the divine calling and right to teach those things. Now, as I've done more studying, as I learned some of the hidden, secret, darker things of the church's past, I no longer can say that I believe that Joseph Smith taught these things by having any private, secret, divine knowledge himself. I think that what he was doing was making comforting sounding stories in a very religious mode that attracted people, because they wanted to believe the things that he was teaching. And he framed it in a way where he was given special privilege to be able to speak with authority, with things like the idea of priesthood power. And so as long as all of those things are intact, then you can believe and receive comfort from them. But as soon as you start to learn that, like, the priesthood, you know, getting the priesthood was something that didn't exist early in the church, and a few years later he went back and said, oh yeah, we got this higher priesthood back. When you start to see plagiarism in the Book of Mormon, when you see anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, when you start to see other things that Joseph Smith did which are not divine type actions, using the godly voice to command other people to start business ventures and to donate money into those business ventures, using God to threaten his rivals, the voice of God commanding him to betray his wife and marry other women without her knowledge or consent. Those are things that are very expected of charlatans. And when you start to see that side of Joseph Smith, you can no longer trust any of these things. And so all of the things that brought you comfort before disappear. And so now the brethren, people in the church, they speak to people who've left the church and they say, come back. We invite you to come back and find the peace that you once felt. And you can't, because as soon as you realize that that legitimate authority is gone, then just like Eddie says, it just disappears in your hand. You cannot go back, because the one thing that made it all work was the legitimacy that requires Joseph Smith and everything that he taught and the prophets beyond him to be real. And once you study history of the church, it's difficult to accept that. And once you...
We'll just stop it right there. You can check out the full video for the rest of that discussion. We're just past 2 hours, and I have to go and make sure that the chaos that's happening in the rest of this house is under control. So thanks for everyone that was able to call in and participate, and just a reminder for everyone to stay socially distant as much as you can. Try to connect with people digitally if that's possible. And our goal of flattening the curve is something that we're doing not only for our own well-being, but also for the well-being of the elderly and the more vulnerable in our society, who we want to make sure that we can spread out the rate of the spread of the disease so that our hospital and intensive care resources don't get overutilized. All right, so until next time, this has been Talk on Things and Stuff. Bye now.